Hello and welcome to Next 2.0 on WQLN PBS NPR. Next is produced by Black Access Media, the new parent company of The Public's Voice. The interns working behind the scenes of this episode that make it all possible are Aaron Cronin and Alani Simmons. I'm your host, Marcus Atkinson, here with guest host Chuck Camerata. If you want to know more about the show, you can go to Facebook and like that page. You can also follow us on Instagram. There, our handle is Next 2.0 Erie, and you can keep up with upcoming show promos, events, and clips about what's going on in our communities and what's next for our democracy. Thank you so much for tuning in. Gen Z, this generational thing is very fascinating to me. I'm a Gen Xer, and I love giving people the account of what I think about Gen X, what I think our contribution to society has been, what cues I think from society kind of spurred those individual accolades or what have you as a generation. But today we want to focus on this group. Chuck's put this group together. It's a very enlightened and smart group of young people. I'm looking forward to this. And we will unpack just some of the statistical attributes of this group, what it means for this discussion, and get their thoughts. And hopefully we can all feel a little more educated on how people this age think in general and what their assessment is of the world around them. And so without further ado, we go into this conversation with our Gen Z participants about their generation. Take a listen.
Here with some folks from the younger generations in our society. And I want to introduce the people who are with us today. And we're going to talk about, broadly speaking, about some views regarding Gen Z. We have in the room with us Caitlin Falk, who is the Wellness Director for the Schools of Erie City. We have Chris Rosato, who is the General Manager of Ascend Erie, which is an indoor rock climbing company here in downtown Erie. We have Jenny Tompkins, who has been working in public policy with nonprofits, specifically with policy regarding climate change. And we have Aaron Cronin, who has been with us for a while here at Next, who is a recent grad of Edinburgh, NPR intern extraordinaire for us and producer, one of the producers of our programs. So I want to talk a little bit just real quickly about Gen Z, and then we can jump into some questions. But for those who are kind of vague on what we're talking about when we talk about Gen Z is sort of broadly defined as people born between 1995 and 2012. And there are some characteristics of this group, this cohort. They are more racially and ethnically diverse than any generation that came before them. They are majority non-white now. They are digital, technological, and media savvy in ways that previous generations are clueless about. As compared to previous generations, they're more committed in general to inclusion, diversity, and social justice. For example, 75% of this generation believes in same-sex marriage and queer rights. 70% have major fears about climate change, and we'll be addressing that one much more along the way, maybe in some future episodes, but that's Jenny Tompkins' specialty, and so she may have some things to say about that today. They are twice as likely as previous generations to be depressed and anxious and less hopeful. And then one thing that I've just recently read is that they are having less sex than previous generations. And they are the biggest generation in American history, just in sheer numbers. About 70 million people fall into these age categories. And the key thing for our show today is that they are just coming into their own as community and social leaders. Their influence is growing, and they will continue to grow in influence over the next couple of decades. And so they are a legit force that we need to be reckoning with as we move forward in this society. And while it can be said that every generation is in some ways different from the ones before, this generation might be more different because the influences on them are so much more powerful and pervasive than they were for previous generations. And so that's kind of where we want to pick up the conversation today. That's my perception as an old guy, that Gen Z is different, that young people today have a different way of experiencing life and orienting themselves in life. And so I just want to ask, do you think, anybody can jump in and tackle this one here, do you think that that's accurate to say that Gen Z, young people today, are more different than previous generations were from those that came before them?
Well, actually, Chuck, I want to chime in on this before these young people get started. Interesting intro. A lot of facts I had no idea about. I'm looking forward to these responses today. I'm looking forward to interfacing with you young people. I think this generation is fascinating for everything you've just named. I think the commitment to social justice is something that I love about this generation behind us, and maybe this is the generation behind us. Either way,
Yeah, you're older than you think.
I'm older than I trust me. I know exactly. I'm 55. I will say on the microphone, and I'm good with it. But this generation, they are concerned about that. That is one of the things that I love about younger people today. And lastly, I'll say that they seem to, much like the generation of John Lewis and King when they were that age, if you read their histories, you'll find, remember John Lewis famously saying, he asked his parents, why Jim Crow? Like, why are we beholden to this system if we know that it doesn't work and it steps on the necks of people who look like us? And his parents were like, that's just the way it is. Wasn't acceptable to him. This generation feels like that. Like, why do we do it that way? It's just the way it is. I'm not okay with it. So I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Yeah, I think this generation looks. We're speaking for you, but so I'm going to jump in and let you do that. But I think that this generation looks at the systems and just realize how broken they are. They're not serving us well anymore. So back to my question: do you think that it's accurate to say that young people today are more different than those who came before?
I think in some ways, probably the most difference that you can see from other generations that have a constant news cycle. We have access to unlimited information that can be extremely overwhelming, that can lead to depression and anxiety. But I do think that generations have cycles. And so, like Marcus was saying, in the civil rights movement and in the 60s and 70s, that generation was about social justice, and there were a lot of movements, and there was a lot of similarities between, like the free love and the hippie party lifestyle that some might say about us, protesting
the war in Vietnam.
Yeah, there was a lot of similarities there. So I do think that generations kind of repeat themselves, but this time we do have access to the internet and more information than maybe people had at the time. Hopefully that makes more of a difference.
I hope. You guys agree with that, Aaron?
Well, I was going to say, what's interesting is like our generation kind of grew up with like that endless war in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And how we kind of felt like, we were there, but like, why were we there for so long? And it's like, I guess having like easy access, like it wasn't just news covering it. Like you could have like the internet to help back you up, show you just how long it's.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's not, I guess maybe we're a little bit more slighted in that way, where we're not as like willing to accept things as just for the cause or for these nebulous ideas that maybe, I guess, has been pushed in previous generations.
Yeah. Kind of goes back to what Marcus said. Not accepting it because people say that's just the way it is. Chris, I see you nodding your head.
Yeah, I think, there's definitely something to be said about, every generation wants to feel like they're very different. But you can certainly find parallels between all the generations at some point. I think taking it on a shorter view of like what makes Gen Z or, that kind of general age group that's really coming of age right now, what makes them different from the generation right before. I think that's an easier kind of comparison or contrasting, because the generation before, things were already kind of going downhill maybe. You talk about all of these different topics, the economy, climate change, all those things that we'll talk about eventually. But they were their parents were telling them the American dream, and if you just work hard, everything's gonna be okay. And it didn't work out, but I think it was just a little bit of like, well, nothing we can really do about it. It's just the way the world is. And this current generation that's developing right now and coming of age and building their influence, they got to see a generation that said, oh, well, nothing we can do, whatever happens is going to happen, and saw that didn't work.
Yeah.
And combine that with the ever-present internet, and we're constantly being faced with the fact that these things aren't working, and the world is the way it is. It becomes harder to ignore it. And I think then, there's an element of we need to put ourselves back into the story. So instead of leaving the control to whatever the environment is around us and nothing I can do. Now it's like, well, even if there's nothing I can really do, I'm going to try.
Yeah.
Because not doing anything didn't work.
That's a great. I love the phrase to put ourselves back in the story, because I am convinced that societies run on particular narratives, and the stories that we tell ourselves lead us to particular ways of thinking and behaving. And the story doesn't. The traditional stories that we've told ourselves for several generations maybe aren't relevant anymore, maybe don't work anymore. And so we need to rethink those. We need a new story, and we need to put ourselves in it and to be the authors of that story. So, Jen, I think what's going on in the world around us right now, Jenny, is has maybe come to roost a little bit more in your life recently than in some others. Is this generation different, and specifically in regard to how they orient themselves or think about the future?
Sure, I'll try to tackle some of that, but I do want to reference what some of the others around the table just said, because it gave me a lot of hope. I think because I straddle this generation and the one prior, I've heard that it's been ingrained and told over and over and over again that we're going to be the first generation worse off than our parents economically, in a healthcare sense, and potentially socially. And I think we're pushing back on that, which gives me a lot of pride that we have I think, a broader worldview than any generation before us because of the access to information, the internet, and global conflict that we faced. And rather than shying away from it and kind of folding, we're trying to take the future in our hands and do something about it because we have the privilege of information. We're trying to arm ourselves in a nuanced and informed way. And I think that's what gets missed about our generation sometimes, that we are critical because we have no choice.
The presence of technology in your lives for your whole life basically has had an impact that it didn't have. Like this morning, I'm at the coffee shop and my phone is like really slow, and I'm with my 23-year-old granddaughter. She said, "Give me that," and in 30 seconds cleaned it all up for me. And what did you do? Don't worry about it. I just did it. And that's kind of the way it is with a lot of us folks in this generation, that we need 8-year-olds to guide us. You all don't. You've been living in that mix for a long time. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's kind of cool because we are at that age. Like Jenny said, I straddle Gen Z and millennial. And I think that age group knows how to use technology, but then also knows how to live without it. And I have a fear of this upcoming, these younger generations, like sometimes, do they know how to do math without a calculator? Do they know how to critically think before they just Google it? Where I think I didn't have a smartphone until I was in high school. We didn't even have internet in my house until I was 10 or 11. So I have lived without the internet. I'm also a camper, so I go off the grid many times when I need to. And I think it's cool that our generation can kind of play both sides. We can live without it, but we also know how to use it well.
I think that's kind of why I wanted.
And you're the younger one here in the group.
I'm the youngest one here.
So you've grown up with this pretty much since you were like a toddler.
Well, it's like I kind of feel like I'm in the middle of Gen Z when it comes to age.
Yeah, you're right.
Like
the youngest would be 16 or so.
Yeah, because like before me, like people had like phones not till they were in high school and stuff. I didn't have a phone till I was like in 11th grade, but my peers middle school and so. But like what I'm trying to say is like the generation after us, we're different from them because
like they're the iPad kids.
They are more affected, I guess, sort of negatively by technology than I feel like we were. I guess we are more prone to use it as a tool, I've noticed, rather than
it can go from being a tool to being
a
who
crutch.
you are.
Right. Let me say this. I saw a meme not too long ago, and it said that young people, I love this to this very second, young people will never experience the joy, the sheer joy of hanging up on somebody that you don't like. Just being able to bang,
slam that phone
down. And now, you press that little thing. But I want to go back to, what's your name again, young man?
Chris.
I want to go back to something Chris said about injecting ourselves back into the story or back into the narrative. And I think that's so important because we're watching an administration that continuously tries to change the term gaslighting doesn't even apply anymore.
Yeah.
That has on multiple occasions for historic events tried to change the narrative before our very eyes. January 6th, it's not what you saw, it's this.
Yeah.
Right. And now you don't get along with the Fed Reserve Chair, Jay Powell, and all of a sudden the narrative, let's change the narrative on him. He was all of this when you were introducing him. Now he's not so smart of a guy.
Yeah.
And when you look back in the day when people were really trying to tout human rights, that's one of the primary things they did was change the narrative. This is where James Brown came out, say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. Not because it was an anthem that was anti-white, but to say what they say about us isn't true.
Exactly.
Your skin is not some birthright of negativity and evil. It's beautiful. As a matter of fact, people pay millions of dollars to lay underneath some contraption to get a little closer to it. Right? So don't let them tell you that it's ugly and everything else. I think that it's important that you said that because changing the narrative has now become modus operandi out of the White House on multiple fronts.
Yeah.
And in order to get away with what we're trying to get away with, we have to try to get you to be convinced that what your eyes are seeing isn't true, or what you thought yesterday, the Epstein files.
Yeah.
We're on the opposite side of what we said not long ago. So now we have to change the narrative. So injecting ourselves into the narrative is huge. I think it's paramount in order to really make any strides in community.
What makes it for you all, so you do have information available to you in ridiculous amounts,
Milliseconds.
But that isn't an unvarnished good thing, because the information, who's controlling the information, who's telling the story, what algorithms are at work, has an impact on what you see and read. So how do you navigate that in a healthy way to find your way to something approximating the truth?
I think and I hope I'm speaking for the generation and not just myself,
Okay.
but I think one of the things that differentiates, right, the generation we're talking about and the younger generation is, like Caitlin said, we lived a little bit of an analog life, not totally analog, obviously, but really came into this internet age. And so we have sort of, I think, a healthy mistrust of new technology when it comes out, where we will say, as talking about it being a tool for us, we say, does this serve us? And if it does, okay, we'll take it on. The newer generation, the next big thing comes out, it's the fad, everybody jumps on it. And there's maybe not as much critical thinking, not to bash other generations, because they'll be saying the same thing about us.
That's what older generations do.
Right. But
that's true.
I think it's just this generation has more of a willingness to think critically about, does this service or tool actually serve me? And in the same way, because we grew up with more traditional media developing in the internet age and seeing all the missteps that different organizations had, I think there's a little bit, not a lot, a little bit more media literacy where we can evaluate the sources. And because we've seen these things develop, we sort of have a peek behind the curtain on how the algorithm actually works, instead of just, it works to entertain me.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's doing some other things too. So I think we just have a little more insight to be able to digest these things healthy.
I agree, but I do think that there is the very easily potential to fall into groupthink. And, you see throughout history, when groupthink really works together in a negative way, we have things like the Nazis, the KKK. They only heard each other. They were in an echo chamber. They had their beliefs. And I think we can see that because of the algorithms, because of you choose who you follow on social media. So even as you're saying this, I'm trying to think critically, like, I really only follow people that I agree with. I really only follow the topics that are of a priority to me. And every now and then something gets fed to you, but it's mostly within your interest or your political view or your philosophy. And so I do think that it can be dangerous for groupthink. So we'll have to be critical of that moving forward.
Jenny?
I'd just like to add to both of these points the great responsibility I think we have, because we've had the privilege of being in a transition period for a generation who may not have been able to benefit from that in the same way. And I personally have to be incredibly intentional about the media that I consume. Luckily, I come from a generation where I think we still have a healthy skepticism, but understanding and respect for expertise as a concept. And that has helped a lot, because I know I can go to folks who know a lot more on a topic than I do and trust that they've vetted the information for me and distilled it in a way that's going to make sense. But I also think the ways that I've had to do it is actually to speak to people, because the algorithm is telling us, continue to be addicted to what I'm feeding you online. and to actually physically escape from that and speak to people who I know are different from me. Luckily, I come from a family of a vast array of political differences and a healthy amount of debate that I know exactly that I can sit at the dinner table when I visit my parents, and that can happen there in a safe space. I recognize not everybody has that. So I constantly try to think about, like, how do others cultivate that in their own life in some meaningful way? Because I can tell you with certainty, my friend group isn't giving me that. I vetted those people, and they're pretty narrow in reinforcing my values. So
I was honest.
I'll stop there, but I have a lot of thoughts on all of that.
I think that's a really good point, because that's something that I would encourage the younger generations to do, and our generation as well, is to not get sucked into the community of online. You can find a great online community. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's it sometimes is just reinforcing your own beliefs. But when you get out in the community, if it's your family, if it's the places that you live, having, I think, intergenerational friendships is really important, because even if you have the same philosophy, you have different perspectives on how you grew up. So
You've had different experiences. You bring a different set of experiences to your perspective, and sharing those perspectives, I think, is really helpful. I love sitting at the table when we have, and I have kids living in other parts of the country, and getting everybody together from, I'm now the old guy, from my generation down to my grandchildren, and having conversations that range over all kinds of topics. It is rich and sweet and wonderful to be able to do that. Not everybody has that, but that's an important aspect of it. So I hear folks talking about third spaces all the time. Marcus,
I want to
we'll
go
go back to third spaces.
No worries. I want to go back to this because I feel like this is the generation that has impacted this past mayoral election. Can I get your thoughts on that? Because as I look at the election numbers, it occurs to me that, one, a lot of people in our generation and older may have stayed home assuming that Mayor Schimber was going to win. And two, this generation and those slightly above and slightly below, it feels like they got off the couch and were a little energized by what Daria had to say. Can you speak into this past election if you have any thoughts on that? Because I think that this is where it rose and fell.
Yeah. And it would apply to Mamdani in New York, and the guy who's running for mayor in Minneapolis. So there's this kind of transitional thing happening with the younger generation stepping up and getting recognized and gaining some power. Thoughts about Daria and Joe Schember in the election?
At least with Mamdani, and I think what people really like is like that grassroots movement. Like, I feel like more than ever, like our generation recognizes that things can't change if you keep trying to use the same like backers and the same root cause. Like inherently, like our country is all about supporting the like capital and like increasing that no matter what.
Yeah.
So if you have people who are bought out by that, want to see that grow no matter what,
right?
You're not gonna get your like your taxi services to be better, or your like local small town to grow as much.
Yeah. Are you saying that the current political class has been purchased?
Well, I think when you look at who
Say it with your
showed
chest
up,
now, Aaron. Say it with your chest.
I'm just gonna say when you look at Trump's like inauguration, there were a lot of billionaires there.
Yeah.
And considering that we had, up until recently, a billionaire who was not elected running, destroying programs, having clear effects on everything from aviation to economics to like environmental to like weather services, as we saw in Texas. It's just crazy to think we keep trying to bite the hand that feeds us. The problem with government is it works best when you don't notice it. So when it's not working at all, you start to notice.
And we're noticing that a lot.
Yeah, and don't feel put on the spot. No one's asking you how you voted specifically. I don't want you to feel like this is a gotcha moment. If you just want to speak to the environment of the political landscape that may have led to a change, because certainly Joe Schember is not the deep state. He's not the guy with all of these oligarchs behind him.
Right.
He's the antithesis of a lot of that. And yet, Erie in large number, And again, I think it was a lot of the numbers that fit into this description said, I just want to try something different. So you don't have to give your specific vote, but I do want your thoughts on how this is playing out, because a lot of people are still like kind of reeling over that one.
I think after the presidential election, I was kind of in a state of shock and hopelessness for a while. And then I kind of got re-energized with, okay, you can't control the federal government, you can't control what's happening at the nation level or the state level, but maybe you can have some impact over your own community. And so I think more people in our generation voted in local politics because that's where we have more influence than on the federal level. Specifically with Joe and Daria, I was actually just thinking, I'm aware of some of the things that Daria has done in our community, and I was just looking into Build CDC because they do some health programming, and I'm the wellness manager. So I was just looking to see like where there's room for collaboration. And I was just thinking, like, look at all these things that Daria has actively done for our community. I don't even know if I know what Joe Schember did before he became, like, maybe he was. I'm not speaking negatively against him at all, but I think just some of the marketing on how Daria has already impacted our community really sold me, because I was like, oh wow, like look at ECAT, look at Build CDC. Yeah. I'm very familiar with the work that she has done in our community, and I didn't hear the same messaging around what Joe Schember has done.
I won't comment directly on the city of Erie race, but I think in summarizing the success of some of these younger politicians across the U.S., they've captured onto a class consciousness that I think goes back to the time period we were talking about in the civil rights era, where if we're constantly reinforced that fewer of us, just basic math in our generation, are going to reach a level where we can have political and economic power just because of the circumstances we've been handed, I think we're more likely to rally together and recognize that if we don't have a movement around it, or we don't call for really specific reform, it's going to be more of the status quo. And I think if someone is marketing themselves as somebody who recognizes that class consciousness and understands the economic inequality we're facing, it's putting them a leg up automatically. And Mamdani did that very well. Just basic things people need. Free buses between work and home are, of course, going to resonate with people who have transportation as a critical unmet need in their life every single day. And I can't quite figure out why others don't understand that formula. It seems so simple, unless you're a person who has a lot to lose by changing the status quo. And that's where I think the key amount of skepticism is in the country right now.
And to Chris's point, even if you can't pull it off, it's an honorable and worthy goal. And damn it, try.
Just say it.
Well,
say it.
I think that's like I've noticed kind of like a displeasement, like especially with the New York race, with the reaction the Democratic Party had with Mamdani. Like they aren't going to support him even though he's winning.
But there seems to be a collective who appreciate that he has something to stand for.
Recent years, I've noticed like Democrats promise less and then still don't do it anyways. So it's like they're just enforcing some status quo. Like I saw a post where it's like, oh, if Kamala won right now, we'd all be drinking tea. But that's the problem. Like you're inherently like saying, oh, things wouldn't change if Kamala won. But like I think that's why people voted for Trump, because they want change. But they don't realize, like, I don't know, if I crash my car into your house, that's still change. But like it's not for the better.
If I wreck the train, that's change. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think there's so much to what Jenny was saying, that it's a generation that looks at things, says systems are broken, we have to change. And if you're part of that system, this goes to what you're talking about with the Democratic Party not supporting Mamdani, that the Democratic Party is old political people. It's the old system. And even though ideologically I may be closer to where they're at than to the other side, I may embrace much of the Democratic agenda. They're still the old political party. They're still beholden to money and to corporations to a large degree. So changing that by bringing in people, and I think Daria, one of the questions that we asked Daria when she was on this program was, how are you going to avoid being one of those people who is beholden? And I think that's an issue, less of an issue maybe here at the local level, but it's a big issue nationally. And I think Jen really hit on that. And I sense from you, Aaron, that you're speaking about what we'll call the elite oligarchy of the rich that is kind of becoming a global movement and is at the heart of a lot of the stuff that's going on. The political class today is becoming not just millionaires, but billionaires. And what the hell do they have to do with us?
Well, and that's a local conversation as well. I won't get too specific because I've had my fair share of disagreements behind the scenes, but that is something that I am privately addressing in a lot of different groups here, because when you look at where a lot of the decisions lead back to in Erie, Pennsylvania, you will see a group of extremely wealthy people.
Yep.
And I've made mention on multiple occasions, like, guys, this ain't it. You know, it's too many decisions leading back to people who just have it like that financially. And so what you're describing on a national and a global scale, that has pared down to even little old Erie.
Yeah.
You know, it exists.
Can I give an example as someone who is a policy advocate locally? We hear a lot about how the fossil fuel industry has bought off politics at larger levels, whether that be national or global, regional even. But we don't really think about it at the local level. I had a flabbergasting experience once where I was having lunch with a municipal official, and I worked for a 501c3 nonprofit, which meant I could do a lot of advocacy and lobbying, but no electoral work. I could not support specific candidates, which meant you cannot buy gifts, you cannot purchase meals, you cannot provide any financial favor to an elected official at any level. Very, very clear on that. And I had this person say, well, the people from the fossil fuel company, the natural gas company, they bought me lunch last week. Why aren't you? And I had to explain, like, when you're making that as the comparison, if you're going to be won over by lunch, what do you think the people at higher levels are going to be won over by? Like, let's make an apples to apples comparison here, even though the scale is different. And it was just immensely frustrating because we were talking about stormwater.
Yeah.
We were talking about flooding and heavy rain. This is not something that should be a bought off sort of conversation, but it tells you how easily that slippery slope can be taken advantage of.
Yeah.
And imagine if you were a person who gets 100 phone calls a day instead of the one for lunch. It would be extremely compelling to hear those things and not take advantage of it. So we need people with really strong ethical compasses here. This is a really difficult time for them, and I'm calling on them to have that line in the sand that they know exists and think really, really deeply about that. It happens even here at the city level.
It does.
All right, Chris, I need you to chime in on this one. I haven't heard from you on this one. I'm starting to feel like you work for the deep state. He's taking notes over here. They were really bashing our cause on the show.
No, I think the thing that I've heard in a few different ways that I definitely agree with, and I think about this generation, is that we've narrowed our focus a little bit. Thinking about why turnout in our local election was large amongst this generation, I think it has to do with, we saw what happened last year. And at first it was, probably a general sentiment of like, oh gosh, we're defeated. And then a re-energized. And then they came back and they said, okay, well, what can we do? Well, 2025, it's a municipal election year. We can vote locally. And so we've seen more activism, and hopefully it lasts. Hopefully it's not just this year. But I think it's just kind of narrowing down and finding our lane, finding our niche. So whether it's a local election or whether it's even smaller than that, how can I make change within the business or industry that I work in, and trying to build change that way and affect things that way, because maybe it's a little bit of throwing the hands up in the air and saying we're kind of powerless nationally. Like, there's not a lot that we can do at this point because money is everywhere, right? It kind of ties in like everything that's been said, but like, it's harder to affect change at the national level at this point. Not impossible, but harder. But we can do more things locally and even just within our lives, like hyper local.
Well, I think that's what also like the online sense kind of becomes a problem, where like feels like there's so much wrong going on, so much like broadness. Like if you even just focus on American politics and not even the global as a whole, there's just a broad swath. And that's why I guess when I talk to coworkers, for example, back when I worked in service, like people didn't want to hear about politics because they felt overwhelmed, right? Yeah. Like they feel like, oh, it's hopeless. I can't do anything about it. I don't want to hear about it at all. But like, as we discussed more and become more aware of like what's going on, once you get over that like hump of like doomerism, I guess, understanding like you have to focus in. And I do agree that our generations has been being better about like dividing and conquering, working within your field to like maybe make a difference that way. And that's, I guess, one reason why like NPR, for example, just as a quick tangent, just because journalism has been so weird like all my life. Is it entertainment?
Is it informative?
Is it both? What is it? And I guess in some ways that's a benefit of social media. It can be like that independent possibility.
You can take it into your own hands.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to take a whole session to talk just about social media down the line. But I want to kind of go back to what you said about doomerism. Is doomerism a thing for young people? Is there a deep sense of doom and gloom?
I had never heard that term before you said it, Aaron, but I immediately was like, that's being added to my vocabulary because yes, like when you said it, I immediately know what you meant. There is like this sense of impending doom sometimes, and I do think that's where we need to come into the real world and have connections like this with each other, where it can inspire hope, or you can do something that's just fun, or you can do something that's beautiful and meaningful, because life is in the present, and there's a lot of doom about the future, but
I think go back to your introduction. I think you said 75% was the number of people in the generation are depressed or have anxiety. And I think it goes back to the internet makes it so you can't really ignore it anymore. Always there. And I think it's at the very least, 75% almost seems low of like people who at least have a baseline level of anxiety in the back of their mind as they go through the day. Like even if it's not depression itself, maybe if it doesn't overwhelm your life, it's just always there at this point. I think the baseline mood is I'm anxious about the world around me because it's so.
But there's the conundrum there. If you're paying attention, you got to be anxious.
Right.
You can't not be. So your options are what?
Yeah.
One is to check out.
I mean, before our next young person chimes in on that point, I read an article about that very thing. That's the biggest difference between this generation and the last few age demographics and back in the day is that bad news follows you everywhere. Right. And as I'm reading this, I was talking about my wife because I work for myself and she tends to call me during the day. And I'm like, well, what is this about? Well, can you believe that Jenny said, honey, I'm at work. This feels like something we can talk about on the couch at home. But to that point, negative news follows you everywhere. And before I throw it to our other panelists, this subject reminds me of a core topic amongst your generation, climate change.
Yes.
Right? I think about climate change. So you remember Woodstock. If you weren't there, obviously, you've seen the footage of Woodstock, right?
I remember Woodstock.
You remember Woodstock, and you've got the muddy mosh pits, and people are just covered, and it is just everything is trying. This is like the gardener or the groundskeeper watching his lawn at Woodstock, like, damn, I just got to replant this whole. It's a wrap, and no sense in even worrying about the lawn at this point. I got to do it all over again. It's got to feel like that with climate change, right?
I think. And I know I'm not the climate change expert, but that's almost one small differentiator potentially between this generation and maybe the generation right before is you had that sense of like, oh, well, it's all doomed. There's nothing I can do about it anyway. So it's like, the lawn is all trashed, whatever. There's nothing I can do. So I don't even want to play my part because it's just pointless. And I think now part of like putting ourselves back in the story is like, well, we have to do something. We have to try, even if realistically, maybe it doesn't make that much of a difference what I do in my own life. I have to do something.
Yeah.
I have to live in a way that will make me feel good about myself because I have to feel good about something.
Yeah.
And then hopefully that spreads enough, right, that we do affect some amount of change. But I think that's like one of those things where it can feel way too far gone to just throw it all away. But we sort of maybe have this more tendency to like, let's pick that small thing we can do and just do it. I'll just do my little thing
personally.
You'll do your little thing, and hopefully everyone does their little thing.
There's a number of things to talk about there. I want to go to Jenny and then over to Aaron because I see Aaron's anxious to get in, but I also want to ask you about kind of climate change and the real existential threat of that and how that affects you and people like you at your age.
Yeah, I fear I may not have something profound to say, and I feel like I should also say the caveat that climate experts should not be how I'm being classified on this podcast. There are plenty of people, thousands and thousands of scientists who know much more than I do, but I also want to point out that unfortunately, climate change is one of 3 what we call triple planetary crises we're dealing with. And pollution, biodiversity loss, which is the sheer number of species and other plants and animals we have on this planet, are rapidly declining. And we have climate change. So that
more
triple threat
depressed.
is just
Shut it down.
fantastic, isn't it? And that's the reality I have to contend with every day, that I know that there's this triple helix of bad things kind of swirling around itself. But to the points that were made about individual action, I think about my own coping skills when I'm spending all day thinking about the doom and gloom of I have to work within the system to do policy, to get something good done. That can take 10 years sometimes on one bill. I have to do things in my own life that feel like they're making a difference. And one of the things, as an example for me, is I care very much about wildlife and conservation and try to think multiple generations ahead. And I own a postage stamp of a little urban property. And over the past 7 years, my husband and I have planted 48 different species in our yard and created an entire ecosystem. We now have chipmunks and moles and voles and squirrels. And we were lunatics running around in the yard with our hands up recently because there was a hawk on our garage.
Oh, nice.
And it was like, we have created an entire ecosystem on this tiny little parcel with enough intentionality to feel like we made our little oasis in a crazy
Great.
world. And I just come back to that example constantly because it's such a good one that mirrors what we're trying to do globally. And it's just right there in my backyard.
Yeah.
It made a huge difference.
And maybe that's where it starts. Maybe that's and we have a number of people doing really good things like that in the city of Erie with urban farms and rewilding and even some projects at the governmental level that are working to do that kind of thing. But I want to go, before we go on to more of that kind of talk about policy change, or what are you doing in your own life to cope on a personal level? Because one of the reasons we wanted to talk to Gen Z is that the future is yours. Less so mine, a little bit less so Marcus's, but he's got little ones. And so how do you face this every day and not just emotionally implode?
I think kind of going back to like what the general message is like keeping involved, like sitting on my laurels with my just sitting on my hands doing nothing. Like, I don't know, I feel worse like that, and being able to like help you guys with like doing the podcast and stuff that is just a small contribution, and that's one thing that like makes me feel better. But like it's just interesting to see there's kind of like a whole like opposite side of this coin, and it's the idea that like, oh, we are the end of the capital, like everything is failing, so why don't you just enjoy it and just let it go,
eat, drink and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Yes.
And like I don't know, it's like if I want kids in the future, like why would I want them to be like, oh, well, remember when we had trees? Like, I don't want it. I don't want it to be so like that.
Here's a picture of a tree.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I grew up. I'm an Eagle Scout. I love going out in nature. It's like you always hear about like leave it better than you found it, right?
Yeah.
Like why can't we apply that on a global?
Absolutely.
Just it's like when they took away the like national park rangers. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like we need to care about like what we have. Like we only have so much. Why not fight for it?
Yeah. Good point. So activism is one way.
I think, and Aaron alluded to this, but I see more and more people our age getting into an industry that they are passionate about. And so our 40 hours or oftentimes 40 plus hours feel like we're making meaningful change. And that's at least how I feel about my job, is that working in wellness, I can really hopefully have an impact on chronic health conditions. I think that there's so many things to care about: climate change, social rights, the economy.
Yeah.
And what I've kind of had to find hope in is like, where's my lane? And so my expertise and my passion and the skills that I have kind of lie in the lane of health. And so that's where I'm going to try to keep my focus. It doesn't mean I don't care about the other things.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I it's all encompassing to take on all of it. So I'm trying to say, okay, my lane is health, and how can I impact the health of my community?
Yeah.
And I think more and more people our age are finding a job that is in alignment with their passion so that they can make a difference.
The statistics bear that out, by the way.
Yeah.
Can I go after something that you introduced us with, Chuck, as well? You talked about intimacy when it comes to this generation, and I don't want to talk about sexual habits of people in this generation, but what I do want to discuss very quickly is there a connection with all of this digital activity? So there are, like, you look at teenagers, and I know that's not this group, but teenagers are actually, they will be in the same room and text each other.
Yeah, I
like
know.
they're more comfortable texting each other, and when it's time to actually look at each other and talk, it's like, what's good?
Yeah.
And they'll leave it at that. Is intimacy an issue that you find with people around your age because of all of these digital pathways to communicate and to connect? Is that one-to-one or that impersonal? Because I would think that stat on sex
Absolutely
speaks
right.
to intimacy,
It's related
not
to
necessarily
absolutely.
to the act.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, and this goes back to the earlier discussion we had about finding groups of people who don't necessarily fully agree with you politically, right? I'll connect it in a second.
No
Don't
problem.
worry. Follow me. But I think part of that, it's harder to find those people and harder to find these interactions because of the erosion of the town square, right? There is no town square anymore where you can show up and just hang out and talk to people and do all this stuff. And we mentioned third spaces. Third spaces came up for a second. And third spaces are really important because that's where you can have those, intimate, I can use that word really loosely, right? Intimate could just mean two friends having a conversation with each other, could be a romantic aspect as well. But you're less likely to have those situations when you're not like in person having those opportunities outside of a school or work setting and outside of, your own home, where it's just your family. And so the erosion of third spaces, like a town hall, in the olden days, or town square, that has certainly contributed to this lack of
Absolutely.
interaction and intimacy and being able to just talk to people who disagree with you. And then connecting to the previous point about, finding our purpose in our work, I've been really fortunate to be able to combine my passions with my work. I was really fortunate coming out of college that I didn't need to jump into the first job that I could find. And so I was able to sit back and say, what do I want to do? And
Yeah.
I kind of decided I'm going to do work that will cause some positive change. And every job that I've done, I can at least convince myself that there is a little bit of good there.
Absolutely.
And in my current role, developing a third space, right? Like
Yep.
it's so important, and it's bringing together people from all walks of life.
Yeah.
And when you find that space, you'll be better off, but you got to get more people into those spaces.
When I lived in Sicily a while back for 6 months, I experienced the thing they call the passeggiata. And the passeggiata happens after dinner each night when everybody goes out to the town square, to the plaza, the piazza, and they exist in different neighborhoods in the big city. Or if you're staying in a village, and I did that for part of the time, everybody goes to the town center. And the young people walk the town center, and the old guys sit over there and smoke their cigars and have arguments. And you virtually 3/4 of the town is out there that night, 3/4 of the neighborhood. And so that's a third space, a place where people connect. And we have so few less of those than we once had, because we can just hop on the internet, but that's not the same. So
I also think because of the internet, we have so much like internet speak, and you'll see online a lot of the time, our generation is so unserious. And I think we're, not to say other generations aren't funny, but I think like we used humor a lot as a coping mechanism, and it's a Band-Aid, and it's a block for vulnerability. And I think that vulnerability and intimacy go hand in hand. And sometimes we're not able to reach that level of intimacy because we're being funny as a coping mechanism.
yeah, that makes perfect sense. Jen?
Keep coming back to the statistic we talked about of how high mental health diagnoses are in our generation. And I want to give us a little bit of credit because I come from an Appalachian family on both sides where those people probably all had mental health issues. But I'm the first generation to want to talk about it and pay
Yes,
somebody to help me
that's
work
the
through
difference.
it.
Yeah.
And so I think giving ourselves a little bit of credit about that.
Absolutely.
And again, like recognizing expertise and trusting in some of these systems, like there's still something there. And then I think about these third spaces when I do have an opportunity to engage in them, how much social anxiety I feel. And I'm an extrovert. I love to talk to people, and I still feel it. Contra dancing is something that I love to do, and I love to go to community dances and potlucks because it's that exact space where everyone is entering with kind of the same level of nerves and not knowing what they're doing, and you actually get taught the dance in real time. We're all equal, and I get anxious before every single one still. It's just an impulse I can't help, even though I know it's relatively safe. I've done it before. And I think if we could just help each other through some of those moments more often, it might create more of a groundswell. If we just acknowledge it for what it is, say how we're feeling, it might help others.
Is that kind of two things? One is you're right. Your generation is doing much more intentional therapy than previous generations. They're willing to talk about their stuff. Do you think that that level of anxiety regarding social interaction exists, is a predominant thing in your age group? Because I would think being exposed to everything that I've been exposed to online would make me like look at everybody else like, what is this person up to? What is wrong with that guy? So you know way more than you used to. And ignorance kind of is bliss in some cases.
I think almost to that point, like, you know, talking about our lives online, our generation versus a younger generation, you know, most of our lives are kind of online at this point, but they weren't always. And so we kind of, you know, when we were growing into the internet age, it was be careful about what you put online and all these things. And, you know, now it's just like your entire life is online. The younger generations, they don't usually think about it as much. Just everything goes out there. But, you know, I think there's a level of self-awareness to it. So we, you know, in addition, not just in the internet sense, but in the social sense, like we're constantly aware of ourselves in the space, of how people will perceive us, versus a younger generation that is just constantly putting everything out on the internet, isn't necessarily as conscious or aware. Now I'm generalizing, but we've been doing that all day.
But I think that's true.
Yeah.
Generally speaking.
So do I.
Yeah, and he's got 12-year-old.
I do. It'll be 12 on Saturday. How about that? I think that third spaces thing, though, my frustration with third spaces is that, because I've heard it's been kind of a theme, talking to people that you don't agree with. The minute there is a spirited, not an argument, a spirited exchange, somebody moves to shut it down. Okay, let's just not talk about that. No. This is healthy. We started fear. We have a fear now of disagreement, right? Or someone says something that there's a great deal of truth to that makes people uncomfortable. Somebody moves to shut it. Oh, but see, we don't have to talk about that.
Yeah.
These third spaces have to have honesty. And so if you don't have a friend or a homie that disagrees with you, I think that there is growth in sitting across from someone and intentionally saying, help me understand how and why you feel that way. And then have the intestinal fortitude to not just wait to respond, but to just hear them, as opposed to saying, well, the other side of the coin doesn't matter. It does matter.
Yeah.
This is a democracy.
Absolutely.
This is an amalgamation of all these different thoughts. But third spaces need to be safer.
If you grow up in an era when the narrative that you're dealing with is constant, and as folks who are kind of on the cusp of Gen Z, three of you have more perspective on this maybe, but you grow up where you're constantly being told that those people on that side of the political spectrum aren't just people who disagree with you. They are bad people. They are evil
You know
people.
who's a good modern day example of this, and this is not dating myself, Candace Owens.
Yeah.
You don't have to agree with her, but if you listen to her, it's like, you know what? It's not like she's just coming out of left field with just any and everything. There's some thought that goes into why she feels the way she feels, even when you disagree with her. That's kind of my point.
But the tone, and this goes to Rush Limbaugh as well, the tone of how we talk about these things has an impact. So if you come in and you do it the way Rush Limbaugh did, you put people on the defensive immediately. 90% of people are not you, Marcus. They are not going to jump in.
Chuck didn't like Rush Limbaugh.
I did not like Rush Limbaugh. You jump in.
He was a lightning rod. That's why I use Candace Owens, because she's a lightning rod today.
Exactly. But and there's a place for that. But that doesn't lead to me sitting down with Candace Owens and having a conversation, or Rush Limbaugh. Whereas in the third spaces that we're talking about trying to create.
But don't devalue this generation, because this generation is starting to invite Candace Owens to the table and say, can we really talk about this?
Yeah, that's cool.
Because I think that they're having an appreciation for. They didn't with Rush. But with this, I'm seeing more of that. Like people who disagree with her are saying, come on my show and let's talk. And it's leading to some very fascinating exchanges.
Interesting. Are you guys, are you part of the podcast generation? So you listen to podcasts? 30% of podcasts are hosted by Gen Z, people under 30. And so it's the milieu that can really work for you guys. The four of you should start a podcast. You are terrific.
He has one.
I gotta listen more to that one.
I derailed the show. Go ahead.
I didn't
we only got a minute or
realize.
two left. I'm
That
sorry.
whole Rush Limbaugh thing just took us off course. You should have known better. So I'm sure we're running down on time.
Yep.
And I want to say two things. Number one is that this was so much fun and so hopeful to me to see so many young people. And I had a chance to interview about 7 or 8 others who aren't part of this conversation. Just super encouraging that there's wisdom, and wisdom often comes with age, but this generation's experiences in life have led them to reflect on things in ways that have led to a kind of wisdom that I did not have when I was your age. And that's very encouraging too. And that by and large, the generation is not checking out and giving up, that they're stepping up. And that's also a very hopeful thing. The future is this generation's, and we want to continue to have conversations because I think that you are, in fact, more invested in what happens in the future than people like me in the boomer generation and even maybe the generation that came after me. There's a lot of, you hear this a lot when you get to hang around with old people. Well, it's not going to affect us. Well, shut up. It's going to affect the people you love, and so stay engaged. But you guys are in the midst of it, and so I want to hear more and more of what you all have to say about us.
Chuck, if you want to give everybody just 30 to 60 seconds, closing thoughts.
I'll to the Third Spaces conversation, and I know, Chuck, you and I talked about this a little bit separately, and I don't know if this is a topic for the future conversations, but I think Third Spaces used to be churches. And as more and more of our generation isn't identifying as religious, we're not accessing that space. But churches not only used to be a place for worship, but you would have community meals and neighborhood or church volleyball games and picnics and things like that. And so there was intergenerational relationships. There were social opportunities. So I do think that if not churches, where is it?
Yeah.
Or is there a place for community even if you don't identify with the religion?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's kind of my bailiwick. We talk about that all the time. I'm going to a meeting after this where we'll be talking about what are we doing in church that makes a difference.
Yeah, I don't know if this is much of a closing remark, but third spaces are more than I think what people think they are. So like third spaces, absolutely. Church is a great example. But third spaces can be, you look at, across the nation, participation in youth sports is down. Youth sports or sports in general are a third space. I mean, even just going to watch a professional game and you're at the stadium and you're sitting around people who bought tickets that you had no control of, they would be around you. You're going to hear things and you might have a conversation. All of these things, a third space can be anywhere, and finding yours can be a real difference maker.
Jenny?
Thanks for those remarks, and I could keep going about why I think all of those are very good points, but I'll just summarize by saying thank you for the opportunity here, and thank you for the opportunity as re-energize me, feel validated. Maybe I don't have opportunities for as often as I would like, because maybe I'm not going to those third spaces that we're all encouraging each other to go to. So thanks again, and I look forward to being part of other.
I am so glad that you all came. We will be doing more of these. It sounds from talking to you like there's more than another episode or two here. This may be a regular thing that we do, talking to people who are engaged, informed, wise, and passionate about the future. And everybody I talked to this past week would fall into those categories. And we're going to talk about Gen Z and religion. We're going to talk about spirituality. We're going to talk more specifically about AI and technology, and also about creating third spaces. My third space, by the way, is the coffee shop where I go and I meet people and hold forth and have conversations. For those of you who are listening to the podcast, we will have information about each of our guests in the show notes. Thanks. We'll see you next time.
Now that was an interesting show. I personally learned a little bit more about Gen Z. Hopefully you did as well, and you enjoyed the exchange and just hearing from the hearts of these young guests. You can tune in next time for more discussion and analysis for local and national guests. I want you to remember that Next 2.0 streams on Fridays on all major podcast platforms and on the fourth Sunday of the month at 4 p.m. on WQLN PBS NPR, which is 91.3 FM on your dial. If you want to leave a message, comment, or suggestion for the show, you can call the next hotline, and that is 814-240-8816. We look forward to hearing from you. I'm Marcus Atkinson. Join us again so that you can hear about what's next for our communities and our democracy. Peace.